Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is what if Naruto was the son of Yami and was the top Shinigami and got Harem, part 1. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic. Yami office. Yami was sitting at her desk doing her daily invoice of new souls. She was a sight to behold. Her silver hair reached all down her back, her body was well developed and she wore very revealing kimono that showed of her impressive bust. She was getting tired of all the paperwork and put one hand on her shoulder massaging it to the best of her ability. I hate paperwork, she complained as she laid her head on her desk. In the corner of the office was a young man with dark hair, blue eyes covered by designer glasses, and had two horns sticking out of his head. He was Helios, Yami's assistant and the only one who could keep her on track. He walked over to his master and sighed, patting her on the back. I know you hate it, but if you don't finish it will create more work for you in the long run, he said in a deep melodic voice. Yami looked up at him and stuck her tongue at him. Can't you do it for me? She pleaded with him, slowly standing up and putting her arms around his neck, hoping he would fall for her womanly charm. He sadly did not. He removed himself from her grasp with a quick transport spell. Looking over at her he sighed. No matter how many times you do that it will never work, he said to her, shaking his head. But I want to relax, she complained, crying anime tears. Helios looked at her and wondered why he took this job in the first place. A knock on the door caught both of their attentions. Yami went back to her desk while Helios sat back in the corner. Come in, Yami said, getting everything composed. The door opened to reveal a young man about 17 years old with blonde spiky hair with silver tips. He had dark blue eyes that and a well-developed face. He had no baby fat left on his 6'2" frame. Yami smiled at him as he entered the room. He was wearing all black with arm guards on both arms. Two large pouches attached to his thigh that held many knives, while a large folded scythe was attached to his back by straps. The young man stood at attention in front of the desk and said, Shinigami number 00001. Naruto. Yami smiled as she looked at the young man before her. She suddenly jumped over the desk and glomped him into a very big hug. Look at my little boy acting all grown up, she said as she hugged him. Naruto struggled in her grasp, trying to get air, but nothing could not. Mom, can't breathe, he stammered out slowly. She let go of him and watched as he filled his lungs with air. She was so proud of her son. He was her firstborn and was by far one of the most hard-working Shinigami on the force. Mom, why do you have to do that every time I come into your office? He asked her as he sat down in the chair in front of her desk. She looked at him and gave him a pouty face. It's the only time I get to hug my baby boy, you are always busy working. It is like you don't have time for little old me. Naruto sighed and shook his head. Her mother was famous for her guilt trips, but today was not one of the days he would fall for it. I would see you more often and I wasn't number one, but I have a lot of responsibility, and also Kami liked to give me a lot of missions. I know and I am so proud of you, Yami said with a huge smile, but you need to find a girl, I want some grandbabies. Suddenly a dream cloud came from her head, showing her surrounded by little children and Naruto standing next to a girl with yet to be defined features. Mom, Naruto cried in embarrassment. Every time he visited she would always tell him to find a girl. He wants to, but as a Shinigami it was quite hard to find someone who was not afraid of him. Even here in hell many of the female demons or souls feared him. He looked at his mom and tried to get her back on topic. You have a mission for me, right? He said, pulling her out of her daydream on little children running around. She looked at him and gave him a knowing smile that he was quite weary of course I do. He nodded and waited for her to continue. She looked at her desk trying to find the file that had the details. After a few minutes of combing her desk she finally finds it at the bottom of her largest stake. Knocking it over she pulled the file out. Helios jumped up and tried to catch the papers but was quickly buried under the massive pile. Mother and son ignored this and Helios quietly cried to himself. I need a vacation, he muttered to himself. Yami took the file and opened it up, handing Naruto a copy of the papers inside. Your mission came from the Magi world. You are being sent to protect Mahora Academy. This is a prominent school in this world and they have requested our strongest warrior. Naruto looked at the file and faceband. This sound like a job for a Hell Knight, not a Shinigami. Naruto said to his mother, this is a Category 3 world, I don't have the time to deal with these weaklings. Yami looked at her son and gave him a very serious look that made him freeze in his chair. They request the strongest and that is you. A Hell Knight would not even last in a Category 3 world, they are not allowed in worlds higher than a Category 4. Also this is a mandatory mission. Naruto wanted to argue but knew that was pointless. If she was making this a mandatory mission there was no way he could get out of it. Sighing in defeat he simply nodded and put the file into a seal his belt. Is there anything else you need, Yami-sama? He said, standing up, getting back into work mode. That would be all, she replied with a smile. As he prepared to leave she stopped him for a moment. Be safe, okay? I will, he said to her, giving her a hug before walking out of the office. Yami hugged him back and then watched him walk away. Sitting down at her desk she looked at a picture frame of her holding Naruto when he was a baby. She was standing next to a tall blonde-haired man that looked like an older Naruto. Oh Minto, if you could see your son now. She said to herself. Yami-sama, Helios said as he finally got out from under the stack of papers, what was the purpose of sending Naruto to an all-girls facility? Yami looked at him and gave him a very mischievous smile. I just trying to help him find someone, that is all, she said with an evil laugh. Naruto felt a chill run down his spine as he waited for the transfer to the Magi world. Why do I have the feeling I just got suckered into something, he said to himself. Looking around he watched as the lift tubes were working. These tubes were the way to get from one dimension to another, they were the safest and fastest way to get anywhere. Standing on the platform Naruto waited for his tube lift to arrive. Hey Naruto. A voice shouted from behind him, causing Naruto to turn around. Standing there was a young man about the same age as Naruto, wearing a green spandex, a black bowl haircut and some very large eyebrows. Hey Lee, what is up? Naruto said to his friend with a smile. Rock Lee was one of Naruto's best friend while they were growing up. He was Shinigami number 000015 and was always shout about youthful things. I doing well, my youthful friend, Lee replied with a smile. I have just finished my youthful mission to the shinobi world. That is awesome, man, that a Category 1 world, Naruto replied with a look of surprise on his face. Thank you, Lee replied. So where are you off to? Well, mom stuck me with a guard mission on the Magi world, Naruto said with a hint of annoyance in his voice. Before Lee could reply to his friend, the tube Naruto was waiting for came up, running toward as he waved to Lee. Tell you later, man. Naruto got on the lift and headed upward, wondering what was in store for him topside. As he came into the light he saw the city of Tokyo inside. The Magi world was filled with mages and wizards and other magical creatures, but they kept themselves hidden from the rest of the world. Since in this world conflict was rare between the Magi and everyone else, it was delegated to a Category 3 world. They posed a danger but were not dangerous enough to pose a problem. He usually dealt with Category 2 and 1, it was his job as Shinigami number 1 to take out threat that might throw worlds out of balance before they happen. As the tube came to a stop he got off and headed towards the trains. Quickly looked over the schedule and found his train. With a big smile and a near inaudible chuckle he boards it and heads towards Mahora. As the train rambled on he noticed that he was the only one on the train till they reached a certain spot. Looking out the window he saw a lot of females wearing the same school uniform crowding the platform. Oh boy, Naruto said to himself as he is pushed against the wall as they all crowd in. Soon they were back underway and Naruto was sandwiched in between two girls. He tried to move but it only caused him to rub against them. One girl gave him an angered look and slapped him while the other let out a small moan in pleas. Naruto was both happy and angry at this predicament, but he couldn't do anything about it at the moment. Next stop, Mahora Academy. A voice said over the intercom, causing the girls to stop their conversations and get ready to get off. Naruto looked at all of them and felt a sense of dread. If he got caught in that stampede, he would be crushed. As the door opened, it gave him a chance to move out of the way of the doors. As he finally got off, he watched a cloud of dust heading off into the distance. That was close, he said, and walked down the street. Looking around, he saw that Mahora was more of a town than a school. It had shops and restaurants all over. As he walked, he did not notice someone walk into his path. Turning his head, he barely has time to register her before he knocked her over. As she falls, she grabbed his arm, pulling him down with her. Naruto, not wanting the girl to get hurt, turns quickly, so he hit the ground first. He looked at the girl to see if she was okay, seeing that he had successfully cushioned her fall. She lifts her head, her blue-purplish hair hiding her face. She noticed where she landed and who she landed on and quickly got up. Naruto got up off the ground and extended his hand to help the girl up. "Sorry for that," he said with a sheepish expression. "I wasn't watching where I was going." It's okay," she stammered, her bangs still covering her eyes. Naruto smiled and saw her looking around for something. Looking at the ground, he saw a red-covered book on the ground. Picking up the book, he hands it to her. She took the book from his hands, their fingers brushing against each other. As Naruto felt this happen, he thought she had very soft skin. She quickly pulled her hand back, her hair hiding most of her blush. "You," she said, and ran off before he could reply. He shook his head and headed towards the main office. This girl ran as fast as she could away from the young man who knocked her down. Her heart was racing. How could someone she had never met make her heart race so much? She ended that train of thought when she saw the time and ran to class. Naruto walked into a large spacious office with short white-haired old man with eyebrows that make Lee's look normal. He also noticed a tall man in a white suit standing off to the side. He had short brown hair and glasses. Next to him was a very beautiful woman with blonde hair and amazing eyes. The last person in the room was a boy about 10 years old with short red hair carrying a staff that was double his size. Naruto looked over the odd bunch and continued his way to the desk. He stopped in front of it and said, "My name is Naruto. I was sent here by my superior to provide protection to this school." The old man smiled and replied, Good. I am Konman, the headmaster of this school. I am glad your superiors decided to take our request. May I ask, what position do you hold and what rank are you?" Naruto inwardly sighed. He was never a big fan of giving his status as a Shinigami away, but this was his client, so he was obligated to do so. "I am Shinigami. I am rank 1, he said, with everyone but the little boy gasping in shock. The little boy just looked confused. Well, I never thought we get a Shinigami to come to this fine place," Konman said with a chuckle. "I hear that the rank 1 Shinigami is Yami's son, is that true?" Naruto again did not want to answer this question. He was silent for a few moments before nodding, causing everyone to gasp. "Really, it is not that big of a deal who my mom is," he thought to himself as he watched the other converse. Getting tired of all this questioning, Naruto decided to change the subject. "What does my mission entail?" he asked, getting everyone attention. "You are to protect this school from attacks of any nature, but most importantly you must protect this a certain class of ours taught by this young man," he said, pointing to the little boy. "This is Negi Springfield, a magi in training. He will tell you more about your charges." Naruto nodded and waited to see if there was anything else he need to hear. After a few minutes of silence, he turned to Negi. "So you're a teacher here?" Negi facepalmed, always getting that question, and simply nodded. The white suit man stepped in and said, "Yes, he is a very talented and intelligent young man." "That's great," Naruto said with a hint of sarcasm in his voice. He turned toward Negi and said, "Meet me outside of the office so I can meet my charges." Negi simply nodded and followed Naruto out the door. Naruto followed Negi down the hall towards the classroom in silence. Negi was scared of this guard. From what he had heard in the office, he was a Shinigami as well as the son of the goddess Yami. Looking up at Naruto, Negi couldn't help but wonder what things has he done for the world. On the other hand, Naruto was thinking, who did he piss off to deserve this? He did not want to spend a long time guarding a smart brat as he class. Negi, finally fed up with the silence, asked, "So what does a Shinigami do?" Naruto looked at Negi with shock. "What does a Shinigami do?" he stated as they walked, trying not to grab one of his kuni and stabbing Negi with it. A Shinigami job is to collect the souls of the dead and send them to their correct resting place. We are the Grim Reapers, the person everyone must meet at the end. Negi looked at him in horror. The collector of souls, does that mean he is here to collect my soul? He thought as he began to freak out. Naruto watched the little boy got very scared and step away from him. "I am not here to collect your soul," Naruto said after getting tired of watching Negi freak out. "My superior assigned me to this mission, so it's my job to guard you and your class till I am told otherwise." Negi heard this and started to calm down, but was still weary of the older boy. He suddenly remembered what was he going to tell the class about Naruto. Naruto, Negi said as they walked. "What?" Naruto answered with a sigh. Negi was silent for a moment, thinking about what he was going to say. What should I tell the class about you? That you are here to be an assistant teacher and..." "Hell no," Naruto stated with a vengeance. "I am not here to teach a bunch of kids, I am here to guard, and that is what I am going to do. No cover stories, except for my job title, just me standing there guarding, that's it." "But," Negi started to say, but Naruto cut him off. "I am here to guard, that is." Negi just nodded as they walked. He looked at his watch and saw class was about to start. He headed towards the classroom with Naruto following close behind. Nodoka was not having a good day. She had woken up this morning feeling relatively small, and ever since they got back from the Kyoto trip she had not been herself. During the trip she confessed her love to her teacher Negi Springfield but was rejected outright. After that she had spent the entire trip in a book, or crying to herself. Not wanting to face him, she had regressed back to the point where she only talked when called upon or when talking to her friends. She looked around the classroom and remembers back to this morning. Flashback. Nodoka looked at her clock as she debated whether or not to get up and get ready. She was still not feeling too great after Kyoto and wanted nothing more than to disappear into a book or to Library Island, but alas she could not. Slowly she got out of bed and prepared for the day. Yu and Haruna had already left to class, leaving Nodoka by herself. She left her dorm and headed towards the school, her head in a book. As she walked she thought of her love and cried a little. She never thought he would reject her at all. He was always nice, but when she confessed in Kyoto he had turned cold and said no. Now she was walking alone feeling sorry for herself. No matter what Yu or Haruna tried to do, cheer her up. As she walked she did not notice a young man walk into her. She started to fall and pulled him down with her. As they fell he pulled her close and turned so he would hit the ground first. She lifted her head and saw his face, causing her to blush deeply. He had blue eyes that seemed to see into her soul. He had 3 whiskers-like marks on his face that made him look feral. She quickly got off him but fell on her backside. The young man got up and offered her a hand. She took it and couldn't help her blush. Flashback end. Now she was sitting in class waiting for Negi-sensei to come in and start the lesson. After a few minutes of reading, the door to reveal the red-headed 10-year-old, but he was not alone. Walking in behind he was the young man from this morning. He had a look of boredom on his face as he entered the room and surveyed the area. He stood by Negi and waited for the rest of the class to quiet down before introducing the blonde. "Good morning everyone," Negi said to his class with a smile. The class replied with the same greeting and wait for him to talk again. Making sure he had everyone's undivided attention he began to introduce the blonde. Gather his thoughts he began. "This is Naruto, he will be acting as our class bodyguard from now on. He paused for a moment to see the class's reaction. At first, most of them didn't know what to make of that statement. A few, such as Mana, Ked, and Setsuna, looked at the blonde with contempt and intrigue. Others, such as the cheerleading trio, wondered if he was single. Then there was Asuna. She was confused to why they need a bodyguard in the first place. Why do we need a bodyguard? Ayana asked with anger in her voice. We never need one before. Naruto looked at the orange-haired girl with a cold smile, causing her to feel a deathly chill. You don't need to know why, just that you are going to be guarded by me from now on. Asuna was not pleased with that answer and was going to try and get more out of him, but the bell for class to start rang. Nodoka watched the whole exchange with interest. Most people never gave Asuna the cold shoulder, but this bodyguard was doing just that. But when he was helping me, he was so nice, she thought to herself as class began. Naruto looked at the class as he sat in the corner. They seemed to be a very spirited bunch. The orange-haired girl was quite feisty but needed to control her anger. As he looked towards the back of the room, a few of the girls stood out to him. There was 3 in back that looked to have some form of combat training by the way they carried themselves. Another was a girl next to the opposite wall. He noticed her when he first came in. It was the girl who he knocked down this morning. She had her head buried in a book. As he watched her, he couldn't help but blush. She is kinda cute, he thought to himself, but stopped that train of thought before it got any further. Can't think about that, he braided himself. Sighing, he pulled out his folder and reread it. She had to send me to an all-girls school. Thanks a lot, Mom. He muttered sarcastically. The day wore on slowly as Naruto watched and took notes on the girls and which ones were going to be trouble. So far he had a few on the list. Asuna, she seemed to always cause trouble. No matter what happened, it seemed that she was the cause of it all. There was one whom seemed to try stopping it but made it worse when Asuna blew up, and that was the blonde in the front. Her name was Ayaka Yukihiro, the class rep. No matter what happened, she would always try and stop Asuna, but it made matters worse. As the day came to a close, Naruto was planning on talking to both Asuna and Ayaka in hopes of saving his last bit of sanity. Everyone was so glad the day was over, but they have yet to leave their seats. Everyone was watching the new bodyguard. He sat in a chair by the window and seemed to not notice them staring at him. Naruto looked up and saw the entire class staring at him. Okay, what's going on? He thought to himself as he faced the class. Standing up, he said, "May I help you?" That was all they need to jump him. Soon he was in a pile of girls pulling him every which way, not noticing how closely they pushed themselves against him. This feels nice, Naruto thought as he lost himself to them for a few moments, but he came back to his senses and quickly detangled himself from the pile. Catching his breath, he looked at the girls and sighed. A girl with red hair and a camera rushed over to him and held a tape recorder to him. My name is Kazumi Asakura. Reporter, is it okay if I ask a couple of questions? She said to him quickly. Naruto just nodded. Kazumi smiled and took out a notebook before starting her questions. How old are you? She asked him. 17. Where are you from? A place far away. What brings you to Mahora? I am the class's new bodyguard. That was explained when I first walked in the door. He said with a sigh. Okay, now for the most important question, Kazumi said and paused for dramatic effect. Do you have a girlfriend? Wait, what? He replied, giving the redhead a questioning look. Do you have a girlfriend? She asked again with a glint in her eye. Is that really relevant to why I am here? He asked her, debating on whether he just might reap her soul over this. Of course it is, Kazumi replied with passion. The masses need to know about the bodyguard on campus, and this is vital information. I really don't think it is that vital, Naruto stated to her, and turned to leave, but Kazumi was in front of him. Please, she asked, giving him the puppy dog pout. Must resist urge to give in, Naruto thought to himself, but to no avail. Damn cute girls, he muttered before sighing in defeat. No, I do not have a girlfriend. Kazumi was jumping for joy in her mind when Naruto finally answered the question. She looked at him, then thought of something devious. No, Naruto, I have one last question for you. Naruto looked at the girl and felt that it was time to leave, but again against his better judgment he stayed and waited for the question. Kazumi saw that he was ready and chuckled inwardly. Okay, if you could date anyone of the girls in this class on a date, who would it be and why? She asked, and Naruto faced paled. All the girls were looking at him waiting for his answer, while he wanted nothing more than to leave. He began to back away towards the door with the girls following him when Negi walked in. Naruto, the headmaster want to see you, Negi said and looked at the class wondering what was going on. Naruto inwardly thanked Negi for the distraction allowing him to get away. He headed towards the door and said, "Boss is calling, got to go." Before anyone could stop him, he was out the door and on his way to the headmaster's office. Kazumi cried anime tears, sad she did not get her question answered. Naruto headed down the hall, glad he had gotten away from the interrogation he was receiving from the girls. As he walked into the office, he noticed 3 girls for the class standing next to the headmaster. The first had long dark hair with dark tan skin and an athletic figure. The second had short blondish hair, had a very pretty face and a nice figure, and lastly there was short-haired girl with a small figure carrying a bokken. Naruto walked towards the headmaster and the 3 girls never took their eyes off him. "What can I do for you?" Naruto asked with slight curiosity. The 3 girls were the one he had pegged with combat experience, and now they were standing there glaring at him. Kono looked at Naruto for a moment before he spoke. "These 3 are here regarding your job position and were wondering if you could clarify a few things for them." Naruto nodded and faced the girls before he asked, "Who might you 3 be?" The dark-skinned girl looked at him with interest and disdain. "Mana Tatsumiya," she said. The blondish one looked at him with expectations. "Kaide Nagase." The one who carried the bokken looked at him with contempt. "Setsuna Sakurazaki." Naruto smiled before he said, "You already know who I am, so what can I do for you 3 today?" Mana was the first to speak up. "The headmaster told us he was the one who hired you, but he had yet to say why. Do you know anything about that?" She asked him. "Not at all, I was just assigned this mission by my superiors," Naruto answered honestly. Mana didn't seem satisfied with that answer but backed off. Setsuna was the next to ask, "What skills do you have that makes you qualified to guard?" "I have many skills, some I do not wish to tell to anyone," he said, leaving it at that. "If you are not going to tell me your skills, then you do not seem qualified to guard," she said. "And why do I have to expose my skills to a couple of school girls?" Naruto retorted, trying to hold in his anger. "We have been guarding the class in this school and we do not need you," Setsuna said. Naruto's anger began to rise, but he kept a calm demeanor, hoping to end this peacefully. "Well, then you haven't done a very good job of it, since they brought me on to help," Naruto said, shaking his head. Setsuna fumed and began to raise her bokken when she was stopped by Kaide. Kaide looked at the new bodyguard and smiled. "I'm sorry for my friend here, she just doesn't get why you are here," she said to Naruto. "But as a sign of good faith, would you be willing to spare with us so we can gauge your skills?" Naruto thought about it for a moment. A spare meant that he could showcase some of his abilities while learning about theirs. "Sure, I up for it," he said with a smile. Kono smiled. This was a chance to see a Shinigami in action. Kaide, Mana, and Setsuna smiled because they were going to show him who was the best. Naruto just stood there wanting to get to the spare so he can find someplace to eat. "The spare will take place at the base of the world tree in an hour," Kaide said and headed for the door. Naruto just nodded and waited for them to leave. Once they were gone, he started to leave as well, but Kono stopped him. "Naruto, I have a list of living arrangements I like you to take a look at," he said and handed Naruto some papers. An hour later, Naruto walked up towards the base of the world tree, grumbling under his breath. As he made his way up there, he noticed Mana holding an assortment of different guns and munitions. Setsuna was holding a very long blade, and then there was Kaide, was wearing a tight-fitting suit and ninja sandals with a large shuriken attached to her back. They finally noticed Naruto and gave him a collective glare. Shaking it off, he walked over to them. Taking a few kuni from his pouches, he held them in reverse position. Shall we get started? Setsuna wasted no time and was the first to attack him in a flurry of strikes. Naruto nimbly dodged most of them and blocked a few. He waited for right moment to strike when she was bring her blade in a downward slash. He blocked with his right kuni and kicked her away hard. She stumbled back a feet only to have him start to attack her. He kept her on the defensive with a use of taijutsu and his kuni. Setsuna was getting frustrated. He would always dodge her attacks and now he had her on the defensive. She began to build up power but Naruto wouldn't have it. Jumping back a few feet, he put his hand together and said, "Bakudo number 1, Sai." Setsuna instantly felt her arms pull to her back, causing her to fall on the ground in surprise. Naruto walked over and picked up her sword that she dropped, put it next to the tree. Suddenly a sound of a gun firing filled the air, causing Naruto to dodge into cover. "So we have a gunsmith," he said as he peeked out of his hiding spot only to be forced back behind the tree. Mana was set up a half a mile away with her sniper rifle out. She watched how quickly Naruto took out Setsuna, and he even used a strange form of magic to bind her arms. As she looked through the scope, she saw that he hadn't moved from behind the tree. She wondered what he was up to but decided to play it safe and signaled for Kaide to attack. The ninja appeared be her friend and nodded, heading towards Naruto's hiding place. She a very good shot, Naruto thought as he was pinned down by Mana. Constant barrage of bullets. He tried to peek out to see where they were coming from but quickly went back into cover. Suddenly he felt the air around him begin to move and he had to jump out of the way of a large shuriken that flew past only to have to block a kick to the head. He pushed of his attackers so he could dodge Mana's next shot. Damn, Naruto thought as he was again attacked from behind. He blocked the kick and used his power to throw his attacker into a tree. He saw it was Kaide and she masterfully maneuvered through the air to push of the tree and attack him. He blocked her punch and counter with his own only to have her dodge and try to sweep him from below. He rolled over her back and kicked out, trying to hit her ribs only to have her roll away. Taking out one of his kuni, he attacks her at 10th of his natural speed, but to Kaide this was the fastest she had seen anyone move. He seemed to leave an after image from where he was only to appear right in front of her and kick hard, sending her flying into some trees. He looked at the fallen girl and watches as she gets back up. "Bakudo number 10. Horan," he said, and suddenly Kaide is trapped in an orange-colored rope that seemed to spiral all around her, give her no space to move. Naruto looked at her and smiled. 2 to 1 to go, he thought to himself as he prepared to go after Mana. Mana was tried to locate Naruto after she lost sight of him from Kaide ATTCK, so far she had yet to see him. All of a sudden his voice filled the air and he said, "Hado number 31, Shakaho," and a ball of red light flew towards her position. She picked up her rifle and moved out of the way and watched as the red light blow up the spot she was at before. She tried to get a fix on where it came from only to feel cold steel against her neck. "You make 3, he said as her relieved her of her guns. He walked back down with her, his kuni still at her neck. They reached the tree to see Kono and a man with a white suit standing next to the base with a struggling Setsuna and a bound Kaide. Kono was quite impressed with Naruto's quick and decisive victory over the girls and he only used what seemed to be a 10 of his power. Setsuna was still trying to figure out how he had binded her arms while Kaide wanted to spare again. Mana was impressed with his skill but was wanting him to remove the kuni from her neck. Kono laughed at Mana's predicament and said, "Can you release her?" "Oh yeah," Naruto said and removed the kuni from Mana's neck. Next he waved his hand and the 2 spells holding the other girls disappeared. After a few minutes everyone was back on their feet and ready to go, but as Naruto began to walk away the man in the suit stopped him. "I here to show you to your room," he said to Naruto with a smile. "Lead on," Naruto said with a bored sigh. The girls watched him walk away with Takahara-sensei and were surprised that he had beaten them so easy and was not even tried. They collected their things and headed towards the dorms. A while later they enter the dorms only to see a large group of girls huddling around near Kaide's room. What's going on? Setsuna asked out loud, causing some girls to turn around. A pink-haired girl wearing a leotard started to say, "It all started." Flash back to before Mana, Kaide, and Setsuna got to the dorms. Takahara and Naruto walked through the main doors of the dorms and headed down the hall. Naruto was dreading meeting the roommate he had chosen, but it couldn't be, was either stay with her or sleep with the robot and the vampire, and vampires always seemed to love Shinigami blood. They reached a door that had the name Ayaka Yukihiro on it and knocked. The sound of footsteps came from the room. The door opened to reveal the blonde girl. "Yes," she said with a look of joy on her face which quickly turned to annoyance when she saw Naruto. Naruto could not pass this moment up to make fun of said girl. Expecting someone else, he said with a sarcastic smile. "No," she answered firmly and tried to shut the door only to have Takahara stop her. "Ayaka, Naruto is going to be rooming with you while he is guarding the class," he said as he watched the girl's face twist with shock and rage. "What?" she screamed. "I have to room with him." "Oh no, I will not. How about we have him room with that brute Asuna and send dear sweet Negi to room with me?" Asuna heard this and jumped in. "Negi is not going to room with you, cradle robber." Asuna shouted and stuck her tongue out at Ayaka. Ayaka was so angry she was about to throw something at Asuna when Naruto stopped her. "There is no need to get violent," he said with a sigh. Ayaka saw that there was no way out of this and sighed. "Fine," she said and led Naruto into the room. As he entered he saw a bunch of Negi-themed knick-knacks all over the room. "Wow," was the only thing Naruto could say as he watched the girl fawn all over her things. "Aren't they wonderful?" she said with stars in her eyes. To Naruto this was just wrong. "No, this is just creepy," he stated and set his stuff down and started to pick up the Negi-themed stuff and throwing it into the trash. Ayaka ran over and started to grab them out of the trash can. "What are you doing?" she screamed at him. Naruto turned to face Ayaka and simply said, "This stuff has to go. It's not healthy for someone your age to be this obsessed over some who is still a child." "It is not," she shouted back at him, her anger growing. Naruto shook his head and walked over to her and grabbed her by the arm. Ayaka struggled to get out of his grip, but it was ironclad. He lifted her up and pushed her against the wall. He brought his face close to her and said, "This is for your own good." He let her go and proceeded to throw everything Negi-themed item into the trash can at an alarming speed. Ayaka tried to stop him, but every time she tried he would always grab her and move her away. Soon he had bags full of the stuff and was heading out the door with Ayaka trying desperately to get it back. Flashback ends. "And that what happened?" Sakurako said as they watched Naruto head out of the dorms and set fire to everything in front of Ayaka. "Well, that was interesting," Mana said and proceeded to go to her room. A little while later Naruto was sitting in the now Negi-free room with a crying Ayaka on the bed. He knew that doing that to her was cruel, but it had to be done. He sighed to himself before turning to face her. "That was for your own good." "Why?" she said through her tears. "Simple, I think you need to find someone your own age to like," he said. "But," she started only for Naruto to stop her. "You are a smart, beautiful, and graceful young woman, who is going after a child who would not appreciate that aspect about you at all till he is older." Naruto said looking at her. "I know about your dead baby brother, but you can't let that stop you from loving guys your own age. What would happen if he would reject you when you tell him?" She looked at him and began to think about his words. What would happen? Naruto left her to ponder their talk and headed to bed. Before he fell asleep, Ayaka turned to him and said, "I don't care what you say, he will love me." He looked at the girl and said, "I am here to keep you safe even if it from yourself." Naruto stretched as got up. It had been a rough day the other day and was glad to start another one. He got out of bed and turned to see Ayaka asleep on the top bunk. After their little spat last night, he had left her to her own devices and unpacked. He watched her sleep for a few more minutes, a slight blush on his face. She is very beautiful, he thought to himself as he started his morning routine. A few minutes later, the door to the bathroom closed and the shower was turned on. Ayaka woke up refreshed and ready for the day. She was still angry at her new roommate for what he had done and said the other night, but some of the things he said stayed in her mind. Would Negi-sensei love me back? She thought as she got out of bed. I love Negi, but how do I love him? Is it romantic or as a brother? She continued this train of thought as she got her breakfast ready. She looked back at everything that had happened since Negi had gotten there and saw that she was not really a part of his life at all. She saw him during class and in the dorms, but he never would hang around her except for the time he came by her house. He was always with Asuna or one of the other girls. She sighed to herself as she ate only to see the bathroom door open and a half Naruto walk out. She just stared at his well-built body, his perfect six-pack and all the scars he had. One stood out in particular. It was a large scar the size of a fist near his heart. There was an identical one on his back. What could have caused that? She thought as she watches him grumble under his breath about forgetting a change of clothes. Naruto turned around and saw Ayaka staring at him. He smiled and thought, at least she likes guys her age. Not miss a chance to mess with the other blonde. Naruto turned around and faced her. Like what you see? He asked with a fox-like grin. Ayaka blushed for a moment before quickly shaking her head. Naruto walked over to her and whispered into her ear, "That's too bad, I might have let you see the other half." Ayaka ran for the bathroom after this. Naruto just stood there laughing and headed back towards the bedroom to change. Ayaka hid in the bathroom with a huge blush on her face. No matter how hard she tried, it would go away. Her body felt very hot. I need a cold shower, she said to herself. A while later she came out of the bathroom and saw Naruto eating breakfast. She was fully clothed and had the foresight to bring her uniform with her into the bathroom. That was a dirty trick, she said to him sitting down at the table. I didn't see you complang, he replied with a chuckle mid-bite. She gave him a dirty look before going to collect her things. She hated that after one day on knowing him he could get under her skin faster than Asuna. She looked at the time and headed out the door with Naruto close behind. Naruto headed out of the dorms and slowly walked towards the school. He observed everyone as they walked and saw Nodoka walking with her head in a book again. He shook his head and tried to think of a way to cheer her up. He started to head over to her only to have Negi walk in front of him. Good morning, Naruto, Negi said with a smile. Naruto nodded back and headed again towards his attempted target. Negi watched as Naruto headed towards Nodoka with a frown. Why is he going over to her? He thought but dropped it as he ran to catch up with Asuna. Nodoka walked down the street to class not paying attention to anyone near her. From years of reading while walking she had developed a way to sense people near her while walking. This helped her avoid most obstacles, but it seemed it didn't pick up a person in front of her in time. She tried to avoid them but quickly tripped over her feet. Suddenly she was caught by two strong arms. Looking up she saw Naruto's smiling face above her. We really need to stop meeting like this, Naruto said with a chuckle. Nodoka blushed deeply and nodded her head. He set her on the ground and they continued to walk towards the classroom in silence. Nodoka kept her face in her book while Naruto walked beside her. Tired of the silence, Naruto looked at with a smile and said, "What you reading?" Nodoka squeaked at the sudden sound and turned to look at Naruto. A romance novel. She replied quietly. Naruto nodded then said, "What type of books do you like to read?" Nodoka was caught off at first but answered the question soon. They were having a great conversation over different kinds of books and series. As they approached the school building, Naruto reached into one of his pouches and pulled out a small book. He held it out so Nodoka could take it before speaking. This is my favorite book of all time. It is called The Tales of the Gusty Ninja. I think you will like it. Nodoka took it from him and nodded. While this happened she thought to herself, he is a nice guy after all. Thank you, she said with a smile. Naruto saw this and smiled back. You're welcome and you have a wonderful smile, he said before walked away from here. Nodoka blushed deeply as she heard this. She walked into the classroom with the book close to her heart. Haruna saw the book and said, "Where you get that?" Nodoka blushed for a second before she answered, "A friend." "What kind of friend?" Haruna asked. She had noticed the blush on Nodoka's face when she was talking. "A nice friend," Nodoka said as she sat down. "Is this nice friend a boy?" Yu asked as she joined the conversation she had been listening to. Nodoka didn't answer, confirming both of Yu and Haruna suppositions. "Did you get it from Negi?" Haruna asked as she nearly bounced out of her, shook her head and started to open the book. They saw that she was not going to tell them and let her read, telling themselves they would find out later. Ayaka was sitting at her desk daydreaming about her and Negi. She was sitting at her desk in the class all alone in the daydream when Negi walked in. He was wearing his usual suit and walked over to her. "How are you today, Ayaka?" Dream Negi said. "I am wonderful," Ayaka replied with a happy tone. Dream Negi smiled then replied, "I am glad you're having a good day. I was wondering if you could help me with something." "Yes, anything," she said to him, willing to do anything for him. Even. She giggled like a curtained white-haired pervert. Negi smiled before he suddenly turned into Naruto. "Can you stop lying to yourself and see what right in your face?" Ayaka sat up quickly, looking around the class and saw that everyone was sitting around talking. She shook her head trying to get the dream out of her mind. "I love Negi," she said to herself over and over, not paying attention to the people around her. Naruto walked into the classroom and sat in his usual corner. He looked at the class and smiled. Today was going to be a good day. Negi came in and started the lesson but noticed that Ayaka was not paying attention like she usually did. He walked over to her and touched her shoulder, causing her to jump. As she jumped, he heard her mumble, "I love N." Negi looked at Ayaka and smiled. "If you would be so kind as to pay attention, it would be much appreciated." She just nodded and turned to face the board. As Negi walked away, he thought about what she had said. Who name starts with an N, he thought, and he turned to look at the bodyguard in the corner. He smiled and thought, Ayaka must love Naruto. Well, I try and help her any way I can. He quickly went back to teaching and decided to talk with Kanoka and Asuna about what he had heard. While this was going on, Naruto was quietly sharpening his kunai, not paying attention to the class at all. As he sharpened, his Shinigami senses went off, telling him that there was a lost soul nearby. He looked around but saw nothing as the feeling went away. Suddenly the bell rang, causing Naruto to cut himself with the sharpened kunai. As his blood started to flow, its scent caught the attention on a certain vampire in the back of the room. Evangeline was enamored by the smell of blood. To her it was the most heavenly scent on earth. Naruto looked up and paled when he saw the short blonde staring at him with hunger in her eye. Why do I have the feeling I'm going to need to run? Naruto thought as he watched her get up and walk over to him. Can I help you? Naruto said as the girl stood in front of him. The young girl looked at him and saw him covering his cut. Are you hurt? She asked. Just fine, Naruto said, getting up and picking up his things. Are you sure? She asked. Naruto just nodded and headed on his way, only for the hair on the back of his neck to stand up. He turned his head and saw the look of hunger in the girl's eye. He headed out of the classroom and tried to shake the feeling off. Evangeline tried to control his hunger, but after smelling the bodyguard's blood, she wanted to taste it. She waved for Chachimaru and started to create a plan to get a taste of the heavenly blood. Naruto sat at a cafe and tried to relax. It had been overall a good day, but he could shake the feeling something or someone was out to get him. I am just being parioned, he thought as he ate. Nodoka was walking when she noticed Naruto sitting by himself at the cafe. She wanted to thank him for lending her the book. Since she started it, she had not been able to put it down. She looked around before heading over to him. Little did she know Yu and Haruna were tailing her. They watched her approach Naruto with interest. Nodoka walked over, trying not to blush as she tapped him on the shoulder. he turned around and smiled. Hey, what up? He asked with a smile. I was wondering if you would like some company, she said, trying to hide her blush under her hair. Sure, I love some, he said, and Nodoka smiled and sat down. While this was going on, you and Haruna were wondering what had happened to make them so friendly with each other. Nodoka is never this forward with a guy, you said as they watched the two talk and laugh. I know it, but it's nice to see her happy, she has been kinda down for a while now. Haruna replied while taking out her sketch pad and started to draw. Yeah, true. Hey, what are you doing? You said as she watched Haruna draw her friend and the bodyguard in compromising positions. This is too good of material to pass up, just think of the possibilities, Haruna replied and began to ramble of different scenarios that she could put Nodoka and Naruto in. Yu just shook her head and went back to watching the seated pair trying to ignore her perverted friend. Nodoka was having a great time sitting and talking with Naruto, he was always nice and even paid for her food. They have talked non-stop since she got there. She didn't know why, but she was very comfortable around him, she didn't stutter as much and he was always making sure that she was okay. Naruto was happy just to have a friend, Nodoka was a nice girl, just needed people to help her get out of her shell. He checked the time and saw that it was getting late, he called for the check and stood up and held out his hand to Nodoka. Shall we be on our way? He said with a smile. She nodded, glad for her hair hiding her blush once again, and took his hand. He helped her out of her chair and they headed on their way. Yu and Haruna watched the scene with awe, but soon followed right after. As Naruto and Nodoka walked to the dorms, they fell into a comfortable silence. When they reached the dorm, he walked her to her room. Had a lot of fun hanging out with you, he said with a smile. It was a lot of fun, she replied. Yeah, it was, he said. Well, I see you tomorrow, she said, and was about to turn and open her door when Naruto stopped her. He had gotten closer and moved her hair from the front of her face so he could see her eyes. That's better, he said, looking at the blue-haired girl. You have a cute face, don't hide it. Nodoka nodded as she turned red as a tomato. Naruto backed away and waved a goodbye. Nodoka just stood by the door before fainting from sheer bliss. Yu and Haruna watched what had happened and were happy for their friend, but first they had to make sure she survived long enough to get anywhere. Naruto whistled a tune as he entered his room. He had a good day and there were no attacks and no one was trying to kill him. Suddenly a shoe was flying at his head. Naruto sidestepped it and looked around to see that Ayaka was seething with anger. You! She shouted and launched another projectile at him. Yes, me, he said, wondering what the hell he had done to get her this angry. You stay out of my dream, she shouted, and Naruto gave her the most confused look. He didn't even try to dodge the object thrown at him. Ayaka saw that he had no idea what was going on and she turned around. Just forget it, she said, embarrassed. She had taken her anger out on him when he did nothing, but she could help but wonder why did Negi change into him in her daydream. After she had left, Naruto finally snapped out of his stupor. Stay out of my dreams, he thought to himself as he gathered his things for a shower. Is she mental or something? He was about to enter the bathroom when there was a knock at the door. He walked over and saw Negi was standing there. What's up? He said. Negi smiled and looked at Naruto, seeing that he was getting ready to take a bath. Are you going to the bathhouse? There is a bathhouse, Naruto said with surprise. A nice soak would be nice, he thought. Negi nodded and led the way. Naruto entered to the large bath area and smiled. Now this is what I need. Naruto set his thing up and relaxed in the water. Negi sat next to him in silence. Naruto, Negi said, what do you think of the girls? Naruto thought for a moment before answering. Honestly, they are a good bunch. They get scatter-brained at time, but they seem to be very happy. Yeah, I see the same, Negi said with a smile. Do you have any girl you like in particular? Naruto stared at the younger boy and gave him a dirty look. That is not for you to know. But you do like some girls from the class, Negi said. Yes, I do find some if they're rather attractive, Naruto replied, looking up at the ceiling, but that is for me to know and for you to butt out. Oh, come on, give us the debts, a voice said from behind them. Naruto turned around to see a white weasel-type creature standing there smoking a cigar. Who the hell are you? Naruto said, looking down at the little animal with interest. That Camo, he a friend of mine from back home, Negi said. He helps me out. That's nice, Naruto said. Camo smiled and gave them a nice guy pose. Yes sir, I am the one who helps Negi get the hotties and the pactios. All of a sudden the area turned colder and Camo looked up at Naruto, who seemed very angry. What do you exactly mean by that? He said to the Camo with venom as his voice. I help him get kissed by the girl and make a pactio, Camo said. Naruto grabbed him and held him firm. You are corrupting innocent minds for your own gain, Naruto said, his eyes suddenly turning red with slits. Oh, F. Of course not, Camo said, not looking Naruto into the eye. You cannot foul the eyes of a Shinigami, Naruto said as when a blade suddenly appeared in his hand. Time to die for your crimes. Negi watched in horror as Naruto was about to stab Camo, but suddenly the sound of talking filled the air. The entire class entered the bathhouse and saw Naruto standing with a kunai posed to stab Negi's pet, but that was not the thing they noticed. What they noticed is that Naruto was completely and the only thing covering his lower parts was the steam. Many of the girls had nosebleeds from the sight of his fit body. The two who seemed the most captured by him were Nodoka and Ayaka. They couldn't take their eyes off him. Naruto finally noticed the class standing there and quickly dropped Camo and grabbed a towel. Hey, he said as he blushed in embarrassment, didn't see Yui there. We can see that, said Ked with a hint of lust in her voice, and everyone in the class nodded in agreement. Are you going to let me out? Naruto said to them, only to see that they were actually thinking about this. What is wrong with these girls? He thought as he noticed them huddle together, then look at him and giggle. I am so dead. I sorry but we can't, Ked said. Why is that? Naruto asked, trying not to use his powers on them. You were here first and need to finish, she replied. I am almost done, he said, taking a step back. You can finish, no one stopping you, said Haruna with a perverted giggle. Naruto looked at them and sighed. He pulled the tower tighter around and headed towards the door, only to have half the class block his path. He walked to the other exit to find it blocked too. He shook his head and got back into the bath. He started to head back into the water only to trip and fall. He tried to right himself but it only made it get worse. He fell right into Ayaka. As they fell, both lost their towels. Naruto saw Ayaka in all her glory and Ayaka saw Naruto in his. No, Ayaka yelled at the top of her lungs. Needless to say, Naruto was now homeless, not that this was not new to him. So he had spent the past few days sleeping in the world tree. He was quite happy. He remembered to pack his camping gears. He watched the class and sighed. It was getting dangerous just living with one of them. As he looked around, he saw the little blonde girl in the back staring at him again. It had been days and she wouldn't stop. It was started to creep him out a little. He opened his file and looked for her picture, but no matter how hard he looked, it was not there. At first this unsettled him, but as he continued to look, he saw he was missing a lot of pictures of the girls. He only had a few and the profiles were about their likes and dislikes. Great incomplete information, he muttered to himself as he shut the file. He again turned and looked out the window. Nodoka glanced over at Naruto, wanting to talk to him. She was there at the bathhouse when he trying to get away. She was fascinated by him. He was very fit, but what intrigued her most were his scars. He had scars all over his chest and back. The most notable one was the fist-size one near his heart. What caused all those scars? She thought to herself as she watched him looking out the window. Yu and Haruna watched their friend. They could see that she was falling for the new bodyguard and had completely forgotten about Negi. Haruna thought this was a gold mine for her new manga she wanted to write, and Yu just wanted to help her friend. Yu looked at Naruto and then looked at Nodoka. She turned towards her friend and said, "Did you know that Ayaka kicked him out?" Quote. Nodoka replied with surprise. Yeah, she did, Haruna said, entering the conversation, and now he has no place to stay. That's too bad, Nodoka said, but was pondering the idea of inviting him to room with them. You saw Nodoka thinking about it and quickly gave a nod to Haruna. You know we have room, Haruna stated plainly, maybe one of yous can ask him to room with us. Nodoka turned beet red at the thought of rooming with Naruto. Me, alone, with him. She thought and turned even redder. I think Nodoka should ask, you said, causing her to come out of her thoughts. Why me? She asked with the blush still on her face. Simple, you're the only one who knows him, you stated, it would be easier for you to ask him than for either me or Haruna. Nodoka tried to argue but couldn't. It was a sound argument, she was the one who seemed to know him the best. I will ask him, she said, turning red again. You smiled and Haruna giggled to herself. While this conversation was going on, Evangeline was watching Naruto with hunger. Ever since she had smelt his blood, she wanted it. There was something about it that made her body scream for it. She turned to the green-haired girl with a knee sticking out of the sides of her head. Chachimaru, I want you to follow him and see what you can find out about him. Yes, master, Chachimaru said and turned to watch Naruto, recording everything he did. Naruto turned and got up as the bell rang. He headed towards the world tree so he could be by himself. As he stood at the base of the tree, he looked around to see if anyone was near him. Next, he sent a chakra pulse to make sure and saw that he was alone. Satisfied that he was alone, he began to set up barriers so he could train in peace. While he was doing this, Chachimaru had entered the area. She hid herself quickly and watched as he finished setting up the barrier. He went to the middle of the area and moved his hands into a cross-shaped seal. Kage Bushin, he said, and suddenly 10 clones of the blonde appeared. Chakahamaru watched with interest and he gave orders to the clones. Soon he was surrounded by them and they all had their weapons out and ready. The real Naruto reached and grabbed the scythe from his back. With a quick flick of his wrist, it unfolded and locked into place. The blade was blood red with a design on a 9-tailed fox going over the blade. He bent his knees and took a solid stance, the scythe held in his right hand. Nodding his head, the clones attacked. The first clone came head on and tried to slash the real Naruto with a kunai, only to have it blocked and the scythe pole pushed into its chest, causing it to dispel. Soon all the other clones were attacked and Naruto dispatched them all. He stood in the now empty field looking around. Chachimaru watched as he seemed to be looking for something. He turned and it seemed he was looking at her. You can come out, Naruto said, causing Chachimaru to jump from the surprise. She thought she was well hidden. Seeing that she could no longer hide, she stepped out into the field. You the robot from the class, Naruto said as he looked over her. He had to admit, if she was human she would be quite the looker. Yes, my name is Chachimaru, she said. Naruto nodded but kept his weapon unfolded. Why are you here? He asked. My master wished for me to watch you. She answered plainly. Naruto gave her a serious look and debated on whether or not to kill her. Who is your master? He asked, deciding to find out who the mastermind was and kill them instead. Ate you, he said as he brought the scythe blade to bear. More than anything, Chachimaru replied. She watched as Naruto's eyes suddenly changed to red with slits. He seemed to be looking at her and she didn't know why. She has a beautiful soul, he muttered to himself. Chachimaru looked at him. His lips were moving but nothing was coming out. She shrugged it off and watched as his eyes turned blue again. Not taking any more chances, Naruto charged forward, bringing his scythe across his body into a side slash. Chachimaru ducked and rolled back. She stood up only to have Naruto bring his scythe upward slash. She quickly dodged and tried to punch him in the side. He stopped it by using the flat part of the blade. The two combatants broke apart and looked at each other. Naruto was smiling, seeing that she was keeping up with his attacks. Chachimaru was thinking that he was someone that could beat her easily if he wanted to. It seemed to her that he was deliberately holding back so they could fight on equal terms. Chachimaru relaxed and bowed to Naruto, Thank you for the spare, it was quite interesting. Naruto face panned and looked at her. Spar, sure we'll call it that. He muttered. Chachimaru giggled at his antics. Naruto just shook his head and walked towards her. It was fun, he said and started to dispel the barrier. Chachimaru watched as he did this and went back over her recording of him. When she got to the part where his eyes turned red, she zoomed in on his mouth and started her lip-reading software. She has a beautiful soul, the voice said in her head, causing her to look at the bodyguard with surprise. I have a soul. Chachimaru left quickly and went to report to her master, leaving Naruto all by himself. He had to admit it was a fun spar and would like to do it again sometime. As he headed into town, he failed to the library trio following him. After they have decided to ask him to room with them, they had spent the entire time looking for him. They finally found him as he leaving the forest and heading towards a little cafe. Nodoka was nervous about asking him to room with them. He was always nice. What if he rejected her like Negi? Haruna and Yu watched as their friend with her internal struggle and sighed. Yu walked over to Nodoka and pushed her forward. Nodoka, not prepared for the sudden push, fell forward only to be caught by Naruto walking by. Hey, Naruto said with a smile as he helped her stand. Hello, she stammered as she tried to hide her blush. You okay? He asked her with a smile. Just fine, she replied with a nod of her head. Naruto nodded and proceeded to ask if she would like to join him for dinner. Nodoka nearly fainted at the thought but kept herself awake. Naruto didn't think anything of it, he just wanted to hang out with someone. As they walked through town, Nodoka kept her head down, trying to figure out if this way a date. They reached their destination, which was a small little Italian restaurant. They entered and sat down. Soon a silence settled between them. Naruto, tired of the silence, was about to ask a question. Nodoka said, "How is staying with Ayaka?" Naruto looked at her, thinking of his former roommate, and sighed. She kicked me out after the bathroom incident. Really, that was mean of her. She said to him, trying to work up the nerve to ask him to room with her. It's okay, I've been doing alright. He said, not wanting Nodoka to worry. She nodded as the food arrived. They ate in relative silence, not knowing what to talk about. Nodoka was losing her nerve about asking him, but saw Yu and Haruna hiding behind a potted plant, giving her the thumbs up. She mouthed thank you to them and smiled, getting her shaky confidence back. Naruto, she said, getting his attention. Yeah, he said with a fork full of spaghetti in his hand. I was wondering. She began but stopped and started to blush. Go on, Naruto said. Was wondering if you would like to room with me. She said very quickly. Naruto looked at her in awe. She wanted him to room with her. I'd like that, he said to her with a smile, making her blush more. He was never one to turn down a clean room and a bed. After that, the mood lightened and they were laughing and having fun. After dinner, they headed out of the restaurant and walked towards the dorms. Naruto suddenly stopped and hit himself in the forehead. I forgot some of my stuff at my camp. He said to Nodoka, I meet you at the room K. She just nodded and watched him run in the opposite direction. Yu and Haruna walked over to her and smiled. Where is he going? Yu asked. Naruto walked towards the base of the world tree. It was a very dark night and the moon was blocked by the clouds. This didn't bother Naruto and her continued on his way. As he walked, the sound of footsteps filled the air. He turned around to see Chachimaru and Evangeline standing behind him. What do you want? Naruto said, annoyed at the pair's antics. Chachimaru looked at Naruto with interest. She wanted to ask about what he said earlier, but with her master here she rather not. Evangeline, on the other hand, was ready to pounce on Naruto and suck him dry. My master wished to feed. Chachimaru said to him. Okay, then go to the market and make dinner. Naruto said sarcastically. I don't want normal food, you idiot. Eva said, obvious annoyed by the blonde's remarks. I want your blood. Naruto paled. Don't tell me, he said and watched as she showed him her fangs. Vampire. Naruto was fuming. Why the hell was there a vampire at this school? He hated vampires, they always seemed to want to suck him dry. What is it about Shinigami blood that drives them crazy? He thought to himself. Now hold still, this won't hurt a bit, Eva said with an evil smirk, it will hurt a lot. Oh hell no, Naruto said and pulled his scythe from his back. No Kami damn vampire is going to suck my blood again. In heaven, Kami is watching them and says with annoyance, why does he always use my name? Back to Naruto. What does he mean again? Chachimaru thought as she watched him take his stance. She had analyzed his battle style and took the appropriate countermeasures. She extends two blades from her forearms and took her stance. Eva gave a nod and Chachimaru shot forward, bringing her arm blades to bear. Naruto blocked using the flat part of his blade and pushed her away. He charged forward and brought the scythe into a side swing for Cha to block it with her blade, but she wasn't able to stand for very long due to the momentum of the scythe. She was thrown to the ground by the force of the blow and quickly rolled away as he brought the scythe down into a decapitating strike. Chachimaru got up quickly and tried to go on the offensive, but she could never penetrate his defensive area. His use of the scythe was superb, he used every part of the weapon. Evangeline saw that her partner was not faring well and cursed the seal on her powers. Naruto was just toying with the robot girl. In their earlier spar he kept his power to about 7%, making sure it was even, but now he was using 10% of his full power. Chachimaru was at a loss. She had analyzed his style, but no matter what she tried to do he would counter. Cha charged, then used one of her side booster to move to the side at the last second. She brought her blade towards his shoulder for him spin away. He used the force of the spin to bring the scythe around Chachimaru's neck and slam her into the ground. She tried to get up, but Naruto wouldn't have it. He quickly took out some long kunai and drove them into her shoulders, pinning her to the ground. Give up, he said as he held another kunai in his hand. I cannot, she said and tried to get up only to have another kunai driven into her leg. Evangeline watched in awe as he had effectively stopped Chachimaru in her tracks. Listen, I don't want to have to kill someone with a kind soul. Naruto stated with a sigh, but if you keep on trying to attack me I will have no other choice. My master's orders are absolute. Chachimaru said and Naruto just shook his head. Fine, he said and pulled out another kunai. As he was about to bring it down on Chachimaru's neck, he felt someone try to sneak up on him. He quickly backflipped over the attacker and holds the kunai to their neck. Evangeline was surprised. She thought she had the drop on him, but it seemed he was more experienced than she thought. You done? Naruto said, pressing the blade against her skin. Eva said that she was beaten, but she wasn't going to leave without a test. She turned her head, letting the kunai cut her a little and bite Naruto hard in the hand. Caught by surprise from the sudden movement, he dropped the kunai. Eva sucked as much blood as she possibly could. To her it tasted heavenly. The balance, the aroma, to her it was intoxicating. Naruto tried to pull his hand away, but she held on firm. While this was going on, Chachimaru had found a way to pull the kunai from her shoulders. As she got up, she watched Naruto pry her master off his hand. Damn vampires! Naruto shouted as he finally got Evangeline off his hand. Evangeline was so happy. The blood was so good and the power boost she got from it was great. It gave her some of her power back, but not much. Before she had any chances to test her abilities, Naruto grabbed her and threw her as hard as he possibly could. Eva watched as she flew away from the scene. Not having the ability to fly, she screamed. That will teach you to suck my blood, he said as he stood there watching her get smaller in the distance. Chachimaru walked over to Naruto and stood next to him. Naruto took his stance and asked, are you going to attack me again? No, my master got what she wanted, so there is no need to fight. Chachimaru said. She looked and saw her master flying off into the distance, but did you have to throw her? Not really, he said to her with a sheepish smile. Chachimaru shook her head, trying to understand the blonde's antics. Before I leave, I have one question, she said to him. Shoot, he said as he turned to look at her. Earlier today you said I have a beautiful soul. What did you mean by that? She asked, looking him directly in the eyes. Exactly what I said, he said, looking at her as if she was stupid or something. She was about to ask him to explain when she noticed him walking away. She then remembered her master and ran off toward Evangeline. Evangeline had landed in a lake near her house. She swam to the surface and was fuming that he had the gall to throw her, but she knew it was worth it to get a taste of that blood and she wanted more. Chachimaru ran to her master and helped her out of the water. Are you okay? She asked the small her only to get a nod. Evangeline smiled and licked her lips. I have to drink from him again, she said and smiled. Naruto felt a chill run down his back and knew that he would have to dodge the small vampire from now on. Damn vampires, he shouted and headed towards the dorms. Naruto woke up and shook his head. He was glad to be sleeping in a room but was never a big fan of sleeping on the couch. He looked over at the three sleeping girls and smiled. When he arrived in the room the night before, Nodoka had fallen asleep. Wait for him to come to the room. He picked her up and set her on her bed before heading to bed himself. He had to admit she was very cute when she was sleeping. He got up and started to make a thank you breakfast for them. Stepping into the kitchen, he starts to see what they have to eat. Nodoka slowly woke up to the smell of food filling the air. She lifted her head and wondered how she had ended up in her bed. She had fallen asleep on the couch waiting for Naruto to come. How did I get here? She said to herself, only to have you pop her head down from the top bunk, making her friend jump. He carried you to your bed after he got in, she said, and then went back to her bunk. Nodoka turned as red as a tomato. He carried me, she thought. Haruna was smiling at her friend's antics. She was the one who led him into the room the night before and watched him carry Nodoka. She had gotten so much material from that she could help but be happy that he was staying. You and Haruna had stayed up later and made plans to get them together. Haruna giggled and got up. Naruto noticed that they have gotten up and smiled. Food will be done in a few, he said to them, and went back to cooking. The trio nodded and started to get ready. Nodoka was putting on her school uniform when you and Haruna walked over to her. So how do you plan to make him yours? Haruna said in a low voice so Naruto couldn't hear. Nodoka blushed and looked at her friend. What are you talking about? She said, trying to hide her blush. You can't fool us, you said to her friend. We know you like him. Nodoka looked at her friend and sighed in defeat. You're right, she mumbled to the delight of the pair. Haruna was picturing them together doing very intimate things and giggled perversely. Yu smiled and was happy her friend had found someone else to niece. Food's done, Naruto called, pulling the girls out of their conversation. They nodded and headed into the kitchen to see a meal of scrambled eggs with bacon waiting for them. The trio mouths watered as they smelt the food. Are you going to stand there or are you going to eat? He said, pulling the three out of the stupor. Nodoka began to walk over when Haruna, accidentally, tripped her, making her fall. Naruto moved and caught her, causing Nodoka to blush. Don't be hasty, the food not going anywhere, he said with a chuckle. Nodoka just nodded. He helped her stand and pulled her chair out for her. She smiled and sat down. He did the same for the other two and then sat down himself. The food was eaten quickly and soon it was decided that Naruto was going to cook as long as he stayed in their room. Naruto nodded and got up to get ready. The girls said they would take care of the dishes while he got ready. Naruto went to the bathroom and began to change. A few minutes later he was ready for the day. Picking up his scythe from its place by the wall, he started to head back to the kitchen when his cell phone went off. He picked it up and listened. He nodded and hung up the phone. He entered the kitchen to see that the girls had finished with the dishes. He turned towards them and said, I got to head to the headmaster's office. I will see you in the classroom. They nodded and Nodoka was a little disappointed. She wanted to walk with him to school. As he left the room he bumped into someone knocking them down. He looked down to see Ayaka on the ground. Watch where you're going, you. Oh, it's you, she said when she saw it was Naruto. Yeah, it's me, he said and held out her hand. She swatted his hand away and stood up on her own. I don't want you touching me, pervert. How am I a pervert? He said, getting annoyed. You saw me. She screamed at him with a slight blush on her face. Naruto facepanned and got very annoyed. First off, it was an accident. Second, you also saw me. And third, I said I was sorry at least 5 times. He shouted back. You did it on purpose. She shouted back. Naruto was getting tired of this petty argument and said, I don't have time to spend arguing with a Shotokan. He walked past her and headed out of the dorms. Ayaka was fuming. She hated to be called that. Stupid pervert. She shouted and headed back to her room. Naruto was in a bad mood as he entered the headmaster's office. That girl had a way of getting under his skin like no other person. Stupid girls and their stupid problems, he muttered as he stood in front of the desk waiting for Kono to acknowledge he was there. Ah, Naruto, my boy, how are you doing? Kono said with a smile. Just great. Naruto replied with a sigh, just great. Really, it seems you made a few fans in the class, Kono said with a chuckle, causing Naruto to shudder. If you mean the vampire, robot, and my ex-roommate, then yeah, I made some fans. He said with sarcasm. Kono laughed at this and Naruto soon joined him. Thinking about it, it was funny. After they have laughed for a while, Kono turned to the task at hand. Naruto, as you know, summer break is coming up and the girls will be all over campus. Naruto just nodded and waited for him to continue. As you know, Negi is a magi and he is taking the girls who had formed a pactio to train with Evangeline. Naruto shivered at the name, causing Kono to look at him with curiosity but decided to overlook it for now. Since the rest of the class has nothing to do, I would like to have you to take the rest of the girls on a little camping trip. Naruto stared at him for a few minutes before shouting, What? You heard me, Kono said. I have to take them camping. Naruto said. Why? They need to get out into nature. Kono said, but Naruto could tell he was lying. He sighed, not wanting to do it, but a direct order from his client was absolute. Fine, I take them camping, Naruto said with a sigh. Kono smiled. He had gotten Naruto to show what he wanted. As Naruto left the office, he thought about the camping trip and was kinda glad he was going on it. I need time to train it kinda hard on the school grounds. He thought to himself as he entered the classroom. As the day wore on, Naruto thought of what he needed on the camping trip and what he should bring in case one of the girls got hurt. He didn't notice the bell ring and didn't see Negi try and get his attention. Negi stood in front of Naruto trying to get his attention, but nothing was working. He waved his hand in his face and poked him, but it didn't work. He shook his head in defeat. Ayaka was not one to see her precious Negi get down and went over to help. Hey, pay attention, Ayaka said and tried to punch Naruto. He reflex took over and he blocked the punch, and then quickly spun her into the wall. He pulled out a kunai with his other hand and was about to strike. Naruto looked at Ayaka and sighed. The class watched in horror and fascination at what was going on. Many thought Ayaka was going to die when they saw the kunai come out, but he had stopped in the end. Why did you try to punch me? He asked, letting go of her and putting the kunai away. I was trying to get your attention, you idiot. Ayaka answered back. You could have tapped me on the shoulder, it would have been a lot safer. He replied back to her with a little anger. Negi poked you in the face and you didn't move. What a tap would have done. She said, trying not to shout. Well, sorry, I just didn't notice. Naruto said sarcastically. Well, thank you, Captain Obvious. She replied back, making Naruto mad. Thanks for the sarcasm, it is much appreciated. Naruto replied back with the same amount of sarcasm and turned from the girl. He looked down at Negi and said, What is it? Negi looked at Naruto and shivered. When Naruto was mad, you didn't want to make him madder than he was already. I was going to let you announce the activity you have planned for summer break for the girls who want to go. Negi said quickly, hoping not to invoke Naruto wrath. Oh yeah, Naruto said and messed with Negi hair. Thanks for the reminder, little man. Negi smiled and sighed in his mind, glad that Naruto wasn't mad. Naruto walked to the center of the room and faced the class. Well, I planning on going camping in a few days and was told some of you have nothing to do while school is out. Naruto said as he tried to think of what to say. So I was planning on taking anyone who wants to go with me, it'd be for about a week and a half, nice place to camp. I will have a meeting later on today at the base of the world tree, if you want to come meet me there. He looked at the class for a few minutes before heading out. As soon as he left, the class was abuzz with excitement. Camping sound great, Chizuru said with a smile. Zazie said, that sounds like a great idea. Chizuru said with a smile. Most of the girls looked upon the scene with amusement. Nadoko was excited and a little scared. She wanted to go but didn't know the first thing about camping, so she was having a tough time deciding. Yu and Haruna had already decided to help their friend and started to make a list of what they would need for the trip. Naruto sat at the base of the world tree and relaxed. He was glad to have some peace and quiet, but that was soon brought to an end when he heard a rustling sound from above. He looked up to see Evangeline coming down the tree with fangs ready to bite. He moved to the side and let her crash into the ground. Hey, you were not supposed to move, she said angrily as she got up. Naruto had backed away and had his hand on his scythe. I wouldn't have to move if you didn't want to suck me dry, he stated flatly as he waited for her to pounce. But your blood is just so good, Evangeline replied with stars in her eyes that made Naruto shiver. So I heard, Naruto said with a sigh. He sat down but with a knife ready if she tried to drink him again. So I heard you taking some of the class camping, Evangeline said as she tried to get the dirt off her clothes. Yeah, Naruto replied with little enthusiasm. As he thought about the camping trip, he failed to notice Evangeline get close enough to bite him, but he quickly stood up when he remembered some of the stuff he need to get. As he walked away, Evangeline watched crying anime tears. My dinner, she mumbled as he walked away. Naruto had spent most of the afternoon gathering items for the trip. He had the food, water, cooking supplies, and first aid kit. Man, I didn't think you need all this stuff for camping, he said to himself. He was used to camping with 1 to 2 other people, who knew how to camp like him. So taking a group of girls who seemed to have no camping experience at all was going to be interesting to say the least. As he sealed the rest of the gears away, he noticed the time and went to the world tree to meet his prospective campers. As he walked up the hill, he was surprised to see a lot of the girls had come. He looked over the crowd and saw Nadoko and her friends were there. He was glad for this because at least someone he liked would be going. Then he saw Ayaka standing there with a frown on her face. Didn't think she was going to come, Naruto said to himself and headed towards the group. Ayaka was in a bad mood. She didn't want to go camping at all. She wanted to stay here and spend time with her precious Negi. She wasn't going to go, but it seemed fate wanted her to. Flashback to earlier. Ayaka watched as Naruto left the room after announcing the camping trip. Many of the girls were excited about going and couldn't wait to get ready. Ayaka, on the other hand, had other plans. She was going to stay here and find a way to get Negi away from Asuna and her friends. As she planned to get with her precious Negi, Negi was planning on getting Ayaka closer to Naruto. He headed over towards Asuna and pulled her aside. Hey Asuna, can I have some help with something? He asked her. What is it, brat? She said. It better be normal and not magicy. No magic, Negi said, getting flustered. It took a few seconds for him to talk straight. I was wondering if you would help me get Ayaka closer to Naruto. What? She shouted, causing the class to look over at them. Asuna just smiled and rubbed the back of her head. Bad test score. Everyone nodded and went back to what they were doing. What? She said again, but this time quietly. I overheard a few days ago Ayaka saying she loved Naruto. Negi said to her. Are you sure that what she said? Asuna asked, not trusting his info and also taking into account Ayaka's personality. Are you sure that is what she said? Asuna questioned Negi, who just nodded. She sighed to herself and shook her head. Okay, I'll help. Negi jumped for joy. He leaned in and told Asuna his plan. Asuna nodded as she listened and snickered a little. To her this would get Ayaka to go on the camping trip, but with the right words she would go in a heartbeat. That's the plan, Negi said with a smile. Asuna nodded and they headed over to Ayaka's desk. Ayaka was sitting quietly thinking of ways to get Negi alone. She smiled to herself and giggled a little. She was soon pulled out of her mind when the object of her desire was standing in front of her. Hello Ayaka, how are you today? Negi said with his signature smile. Ayaka was overjoyed that Negi was talking to her and quickly replied with, "I doing fine, how about you?" The conversation quickly dissolved into small talk as Negi waited for the right moment to his plan. He saw that she was getting a little bored of the small talk and started his plan. So are you going on the camping trip with Naruto? Negi asked innocently. When Ayaka heard Naruto's name she frowned. No, she said. That's too bad, Negi said with a fake sadness, but to the obsessive girl it seemed real. Why's that? She asked, hoping to find out what was wrong with not going. It seemed fun and I wanted to go, but I have some teaching things to do, Negi said. I haven't done that much camping and was hoping you'd tell me what it's like. Ayaka was jumping for joy on the inside that her precious Negi wanted her help, but she still didn't want to go on the camping trip. Sorry Negi, but I can't go. Negi saw that his plan was failing and Asuna stepped in to help. Are you sure you don't want to go? Ayaka nodded her head and Asuna put her part of the plan in action. Well, that's too bad. I was wondering what would happen with Naruto all alone with the rest of the class. Ayaka's brain immediately began to picture what would happen. He saw Chizuru with her shirt almost off and Naruto standing over her with a perverted grin. No please. Dream, Chizuru said, and Dream Naruto leaned in. Ayaka stood up with a righteous fury. I shall not let him lay a hand on any of them, she shouted, and all the class looked at her as if she was insane. Asuna smiled to herself as she watched Ayaka prepare for the trip. Flashback end. Ayaka was now standing with the rest of the girls waiting for Naruto to speak. Naruto looked out at the girls and smiled. Hello everyone, he said, getting everyone attention. Hello Naruto, they all said in unison. Since you are all here, that means you're going camping with me, Naruto said with a warm smile, causing a few girls to blush. He made sure everyone was listening before he continued. He pulled out a stack of papers and started to pass them out. In this packet is all the information on what to bring to the trip, Naruto said as he was handing out packets. It has all the basic on camping and also has some instruction on what to do while in the wilderness. All the girls nodded when Zazie raised her hand. Quote, question mark, quote. Everyone looked at her with confusion except Naruto. Good question, he said to the silver hair girl. Yes, I will not be the only chaperone on this camping trip. The nurse Shirzura has decided to come along in case someone gets hurt. Ayaka looked on with a smile. With Ms. Minato going, I can stay with my precious Negi, she said and started to leave, but Naruto suddenly appeared in front of her. Like I said before, if you are here you are going camping, he said to her in a firm tone. I don't have to if I change my mind, she said and tried to walk past him. Sorry, but you can't, he stated and gave her a smirk. By coming to this meeting you are obligated to go on the trip even if I have to drag you out of your room kicking and screaming. You wouldn't dare, she said with anger and tried to punch him in the face. Naruto grabbed her fist and twirled her into him. He wrapped his other arm around her and whispered into her ear. I dare. She blushed and struggled in his grip. He laughed to himself and let go of the blonde. Nodoka watched the scene with envy. She wanted Naruto to wrap his arm around her like that. Yu noticed this and was more determined than ever to get Nodoka with Naruto. Naruto turned to the class and smiled. Now if you need help finding everything, I am going to go shopping this Saturday with anyone who needs it. If you have any more questions, consult the packet or come ask me. He waved to the girls and headed back to the dorms with a smile on his face. This was going to be fun. Naruto waited by the train station watching to see if any of the girls were on their way. He thought that he would get at least one or two girls that needed help, so he was hoped for a relaxing day. Naruto, a familiar voice shouted, drawing his attention. Nodoka, you, and Haruna were walking towards him. He smiled at his roomie and waved. Hey, how are you guys doing? Naruto asked with a big smile. Nodoka just blushed. Yu sighed looking at her friend and Haruna giggled. We're here to go get our camping supplies with you. Nodoka said quietly. Naruto smiled, glad that at least a few were here to get their stuff. If I had known you guys were coming, I would have waited for you at the dorms. Nodoka blushed at hearing this while her two best friends smiled at her antics. They continued their conversation while waiting for more people. Suddenly two things flew out of the air. Naruto moved and saw two short red-haired girls standing next to each other. They were Fuka and Fumika Narutaki, the pranksters of the class. They looked at Naruto and the library trio and smiled before shouting. We found him. Naruto covered his ear as they shouted, and when they stopped they saw a large group coming towards them. In it was everyone that was going except Ayaka and Zazie. Naruto was shocked that so many of the girls need help with getting what they need. He quickly fell out of his shock and said, Is everyone here? He got a big yes. He smiled and led the way towards the camping supply store. Flashback end. As he watched the clouds, he didn't notice Chachimaru walk towards him. She stood a few feet from him waiting to see if he would acknowledge her presence. A few minutes had passed and he had yet to say anything. Excuse me, she said, drawing his attention. Naruto turned and saw her standing there. He smiled but quickly looked around to see if the little blonde bloodsucker was about. Chachimaru watched this and chuckled to herself at his antics. My master is not here, she said and watched him sigh in relief. Naruto walked towards her and stood by her. So what brings you here? He asked with curiosity. Chachimaru was silent for a few moments before turning to face him. I came to ask a question that has been bothering me since our battle, she said to him. He watched her and waited for her to continue. When we were fighting and you had me pinned, you said, I have a kind soul. Yeah, what about it? He said as if didn't matter. I am an android, how can I have a soul? She asked him with pleading eyes. He looked at her and saw that this was what was troubling her. He sighed to himself and thought for a moment. She watched his body language and saw that he was in deep thought. Suddenly he pulled her into a tight hug. She felt his warmth throughout her body. She had been hugged before, but she had never felt such warmth. He leaned in and whispered into her ear. If you can feel my warmth, you have a soul, he said, causing her eye to widen. Only those with hatred cannot feel this warmth, but a kind soul should feel it just fine. Chachimaru was shocked as he just held her close. What he said had made no logical sense, but she felt in her body, no wait, her soul, that he was right. She had a soul, she was not just an android. Naruto let go of her and looked at her face. She looked like she was about to cry, but she couldn't. He leaned in again and kissed her softly on her cheek. Smile, it makes you look beautiful, he said after the kiss. Chachimaru just looked at him before pulling him close and pushing her lips against his. Naruto was surprised by this movement but soon was lost in the moment. Chachimaru broke the kiss and blushed. She didn't know why she did it. He made her feel happy and warm. She couldn't explain it. She couldn't be near him at that moment and she quickly ran off. Wow, Naruto said as he stood there, his brain short-circuiting and fainted. He was woken up a few minutes later by the library trio. Oh my head, Naruto said as he sat up. He looked around and saw the three girls. Did that really happen? He thought to himself before he heard his name being called. Naruto, Nodoka said, getting his attention. He turned to look at her but couldn't help but blush lightly. He hid it fairly easily, but if you looked closely you could see it. Yeah, what is it? He replied and smiled. Why were you laying on the ground? She asked, titling her head to the side. Naruto rubbed his head in embarrassment but didn't know what to say. Was Chachimaru really here or did he just eat the expired ramen again? I didn't get much sleep, he lied, hoping they would buy it. Yu looked at him and knew he was lying. He was a heavy sleeper and seemed to have no trouble sleeping the night before. Haruna thought the same thing, but Nodoka bought it. That's okay, she said as he stood up. Naruto nodded and then proceeded to check if they had everything packed and ready to go. As the morning progressed, more and more girls came and he proceeded to make sure they were ready. He smiled and was glad he had a good turnout, but he paled when he heard the sound of wheels. He quickly turned to see Ayaka pulling along a large suitcase. Naruto looked at the girl and smirked. Walking over to her, he said, "What you have in there, a kidnapped Negi?" Ayaka looked at him with anger. "No," she shouted, "it all I need for the camping trip." Naruto quickly took the suitcase from her. "I will be the judge of that," he said and opened it. Inside were some clothes, enough to last the entire trip, toiletries, and a lot of Negi-themed items. Naruto shook his head and proceeded walked over to the base of the tree, taking one of the extra camping backpack and equipment. He proceeded to unpack her suitcase and put it in there. He put everything except the Negi items. Throw the bag to the girl. He turned to look at her. "This is everything you need for the trip. Everything else in this suitcase is excess weight that you don't need," he said, then proceeded to light a match and set the suitcase on fire. Ayaka watched in horror as again her Negi-themed items went up in flames. "Why?" she cried. "Anime tears as the bag burned. You horrid monster, those were priceless." "I try," he said with a smile before going to check everyone else's stuff. After running a final check that everyone was packed and ready to go, he smiled. Naruto walked to the front of the group and said, "Everyone ready?" "Yeah," all the girls shouted with excitement. Naruto nodded and replied, "Alright, let's go," and proceed to load the bus. A few hours later, Naruto smiled as he smelled the forest air. He always loved nature, it was so much better than a city. Everyone was getting off the bus and getting their things. The library trio were talking amongst themselves about what plant they can identify with their forest plant book. The cheerleader trio was exciting about the large lake. The twins were the same as well as most of the class. Mana and Ked were looking forward to what Naruto had called the challenge hike. Ayaka was not that excited about doing anything, but she was glad to have time to relax and plan to get with her Negi. Naruto waved everyone over and made sure they had everything they have packed. "Okay everyone, the campsite is about a 3-mile hike from here," he said with a smile. Some of the girls were nervous about the hike, but Naruto gave them a reassuring smile. "It won't be that bad. There is a trail that goes all the way up there." Many of the girls sighed in relief. Naruto watched them for a moment before speaking again. "Okay, we are going to split into 2 groups," he said, causing the girl to look at him in confusion. "2 groups?" Chizuru said with curiosity. Naruto nodded and answered, "Yes, 2 groups. One group is going to lead by Ms. Minamoto while the other is going on the challenge hike to camp." "The challenge hike?" Chisame said, not liking the sound of that. Mana and Ked smiled and were looking forward to. Naruto noticed Chisame's discomfort and put a hand on her shoulder reassuringly. "The challenge hike is a 8-mile hike to camp over rough terrain," he said. "And you don't have to go on it unless you want to. Okay, now everyone going on the challenge hike over here by me," Naruto said and watched Zazi, Mana, Ked, Chio, and Ayaka walk over to him. Naruto expect 3 of the 5, but Ayaka was the surprise. He gave the other blonde a serious look before asking, "Are you sure you up for this?" "I am," Ayaka said with conviction. In her mind, if she could survive the challenge hike, she could get Negi to be hers. Nodoka watched the interaction and wanted to walk over to the challenge side, but she knew she wouldn't last. She walked over to Naruto and tapped him on the shoulder. "Will we see you at camp tonight?" Naruto thought for a moment before answering, "Depends on how the other keep up." He smiled. "Okay, be safe," Nodoka said and gave him a hug. He smiled and hugged her back. "I'll be fine," he said and gave her a big smile. Nodoka smiled back and walked back over to her friends. Soon everyone was ready to leave. Naruto turned and started to walk towards the treeline. "We'll see you later," he said and disappeared into the forest, followed by the 5 brave girls that took the challenge. The other group watched them leave before heading up the trail to the campsite. Naruto led the group through a deer trail through the forest that had many twists and turns. Soon the terrain began to get rocky. At first Ayaka thought it was going to be easy, but as the hike went on she saw that this was going to be much harder than she thought. Mana and Ked were having a lot of fun. They really liked the trail that Naruto was taking on them, and the challenge hike was living up to its name. They stopped for a while, allowing the last the group to catch up. Ayaka slowly walked towards the waiting group, panting heavily. Having fun there? Naruto asked the Ayaka with a smirk. Ayaka gave him a dirty look as she rested for a moment. This is insane, she said, falling down on her butt. Naruto smiled and replied, I know it, great, right? Ayaka looked at the bodyguard with horror in her eyes. He's insane, she thought. No one find hiking this type of trail fun. Yeah, it's a lot of fun, Ked said with a smile while Ayaka looked at her and shook. Mana nodded in agreement and Chio said, this is awesome. You're insane, Ayaka shouted, causing most of the people in the group to laugh. Naruto looked at her and said, you're just figuring this out now. They rest for a few more minutes before heading out again. They traveled through the trees for a few more hours before resting for lunch. Naruto opened a pack of instant ramen and quickly lit a fire to boil the water. Mana, Ked and Zazie had some sandwiches they made while Chio at a Nukenin. Ayaka forgot to get lunch, so Naruto had given her a cup of ramen. She thanked him, thinking he would just let her starve. After everything was picked up and everyone was ready, they continued the hike. Back with the other group, they had reached the campsite and were setting up their tent and other camping gear. Nodoka helped up the tent that she was going to share with Yu and Haruna. When they first arrived at the campsite, they were surprised by how beautiful the area was. They were camping near a pristine lake that seemed stretched for a while. The campgrounds were clean and flat, so they didn't have to worry about sleeping with rocks on their backs. Most of the girls were excited and wanted to set up quickly so they could have fun in the lake. As they finished setting everything up, you noticed that Nodoka was looking around to see if the other group had